Welcome back to the Ephemeris Podcast. I'm your host, Aphelion, and welcome to Season 2, which we are titling Cosmology. I believe I will be changing up the episode art for the season, just for the sake of it, make it a little bit fresh for your eyes and all that. But essentially, before I get into the outlook of the season, I do genuinely apologize for going on a 2-week vacation without notice. Getting prepared for the end of the year or school year for me, so just things have been a little bit out of whack, and I thought since we have a season break, or like a splitting of seasons, I thought it would just be a nice time to take like 1-2 weeks. Don't stress myself too much about writing podcast episodes, because I was getting quite tired at the end of the day when I was getting back from school on the weekdays and all, and track was happening, so whatever. That's enough of me. Let's talk about the outlook for the season. So the plan is we're going to go through the timeline of cosmological theory, or at least a little more intriguing parts about it. For each episode, we're going to kind of analyze how the theory came about, what parts of it resonate with modern cosmological theory, and what doesn't, and for what reasons, what contradicts, like what modern knowledge contradicts some of those cosmological theories. And so for the first episode, obviously we're going to start with the earliest theory of them all, which is Vedic Cosmology. It can be referred to as ancient Indian cosmology or Hindu cosmology, but the idea is that these theories came from Vedas, which were Hindu religious texts, and so they're associated with Hinduism and Vedas. So it's called Vedic Cosmology. Sorry, I'm struggling to speak. It's been a while. All right. So from what I can tell, this cosmological theory does have quite a lot to unpack. There are about 4 to 5 main points, so let's get started. Vedic cosmology, just for the record, dates back to the 15th century when some of the first Vedas and Brahmanas were written. And again, these are Hindu forms of religious texts. Sections of these texts, firstly, talk about the timescales of the universe over more common units established in other religions, such as days, months, etc. So they're not really thinking about solar years, lunar years, months, days, that kind of stuff. They've got some interesting cosmological timescales that we're going to analyze right here. So one of their most significant timescales was the Kalpa. And this translates to the day of Brahma and is about 1,000 yugas, which is like a world age. Let's put it that way. It's a little bit difficult to translate Vedas because they were written in Sanskrit, and the knowledge of Sanskrit is very limited to specific people. It's not a very widely used language, so it's a little bit difficult to pull some translations, which is a little bit of a preface for some of the other terms I will bring up in the episode. So yugas are 1,200 divine years, but let's simplify it. Let's just say the modern equivalent of a yuga is 4.32 million years. So imagine a kalpa being an eon and yugas being about 4 million years on Earth, essentially. A mahakalpa, on the other hand, would be 4.32 billion years in modern measurements of time, and is said by the text to be the time frame in which universes, not solar systems, of which there are many, are created and disassembled. And what's interesting about that is very, very close to the formation of the solar system, which was about 4.5 billion years ago, give or take maybe a couple of million. And again, just to make sure you didn't mishear me, I said universes are created and destroyed in kalpas and not solar systems. But on that note, now that we know that they had some pretty accurate time scales that can be converted into modern numbers and have some kind of significance, now that we know that, what did they say about the end of the universe? Because they've established time scales about when it began. Let's see what they said about how it ends. So they said that the universe's age was about 100 years of Brahma, which supposedly 50 of them are supposed to be 155 trillion years. But obviously, if you compare that to what we know about the universe today, that is way off. So, okay, timescales are falling apart a little bit here. There are no units of measurement that do come close to what we know about the age of the universe, which is about a little bit less than 14 billion years old. If we were to try to create an equivalent, it would be about 3 kalpas, but there was no such measurement when Vedas talked about cosmology. So, yeah, that's kind of where the story about timescales ends. Let's talk about a little bit more about the beginning, because I know we talked about timescales, predicting the beginning, but we didn't really talk about how they actually thought the universe came about. So it was believed in the Vedas that there was such a non-existence that nothingness did not exist. And saying that is kind of funny. I chuckle when I read that, but it's quite well put if you think about it. Before the universe, a realm in which we could claim nothing existed in itself did not exist, right? So it's weird. But before we get into specific parts of the text, I do want to mention that Vedic theory proclaims 2 states of the cosmos: the unmanifested state and the manifested state. So what the Vedas stated was essentially before the cosmos came about, there was a darkness, wrapped by darkness, and there was a sea of unmanifested water, right? So things in the unmanifested state. So I think the best way to imagine this, or at least what makes sense in my head, is you imagine a bubble inside of a bubble, and everything between the bubbles is kind of a weird mesh, just some whatever you want to imagine is in there, right? But it's an unmanifested state based on the Vedas. And yeah, that's basically what this theory is saying. So first, as we get closer to the creation of the universe, the power of the heat generated an existence within non-existence, which obviously creates a paradox. But if you go back to the image of darkness wrapped in darkness and imagine each bubble or each darkness as a sort of a bubble, it kind of makes sense. The inner darkness of the bubble becomes something within the other bubble, hence existence within non-existence, right? So after this paradox, Brahma, the god of creation in Hinduism, brought the universe into existence. So it's like he popped the outer bubble, I guess. And with that, you get the cosmic egg, is what they call it, or the cosmos egg is what they call it. So that's the theory of the creation of the universe according to Vedas, just as a supplementary note. It also proclaims the cyclical nature of universes and how there are many of them, leading into ideas of multiverse and the idea that our universe may be one of many Big Bangs. And that's getting into some of the fun ideas that we theorize about today, Big Rib, Big Crunch, Big Freeze, which we'll get into once we're done with all of the ancient cosmological theories and, multiverses. They also did not believe in the sun or earth being unique, and there were many suns and planets out there. So we know this is true today, but let's consider that this was in the 15th century, was it BCE, I believe, right? So considering that theory was formed back then, that is a very, very, very progressive thought, because we know that some of the ancient Western cosmological theories liked to create a geocentric model, which put the Earth at the center of the universe, or the heliocentric model, which kind of assumed the sun to be the center of the universe. So yeah, it was pretty darn progressive. And speaking of the sun and the Earth, Vedas actually quite accurately measured the astronomical unit and many other distance measurements. So we're going a little bit back to the numbers. Timescales was kind of good, not completely successful, but let's talk about some distance measurements. So they predicted the distance of the sun from the Earth to be Yuga Sahasrara Yojan, right? Which is kind of like saying a yuga of 1,008 miles. I don't know how much that'll make sense to the people listening, so take that as you will. Hopefully it does make sense. It's a lot to digest, but let's cut straight into the numbers so that it's not confusing for everybody. Yuga, in terms of times, as I said earlier, was 12,000 divine years, right? But here we'll just use the number 12,000. Just Yuga in general is 12,000. So 12,000, 1,008 miles, which is essentially, if you multiply those numbers together, 12,000 times 1,000 times 8, you'll get 69 million. And so Yuga Sahasrara Yojan is going to translate to 96 million miles. And considering that an astronomical unit today is 93 million miles, that is pretty freaking impressive. I will say that. That's crazy. But yeah, coming from the 15th century, that is pretty bizarre. So let's bear that in mind for the rest of the episode, because I forgot to mention how crazy that is. All right, also, something cool about numbers. So the number 108, tends to be a recurring and sacred number in Hindu culture. So it's a recurring number. I can't be bothered to listen, analyze, the whole theory behind why 108 tends to be a sacred number, but just keep this in mind. 108 is believed to be a number that resembles stages of human evolution, resemble the universe, humility and spiritual practice, and timelessness all at once. So it's a very big number in terms of Hinduism, right? But cosmology gives us another reason to believe the number is significant, and that Hinduism had another key to the universe unlocked without even realizing. So here we go. The ratio of the diameter of the sun to the diameter of the earth works out to be a ratio of 108 to 1. First place we see 108. The ratio of an astronomical unit to the diameter of the sun works out to be 108 to 1. The ratio of the distance from the earth to the moon to the diameter of the moon also works out to be 108 to 1. Hopefully I've been saying that right the whole time. If I wasn't, then the ratio for all three of those was 108 to 1. So that's pretty cool. There are a lot of boxes that Vedic cosmology is ticking right now. And considering it was many years ago from today, again, very crazy. So the last thing I will cover, instead of repeating myself about how cool Vedic cosmology is let's cover this idea of gunas. In Hindu cosmology, gunas represent three fundamental principles that operate the universe around. It's a little bit tedious to dissect exactly what is meant by gunas, but what we can say is that the idea of three gunas has some equivalence to three very important physical forces we observe today: gravitational, electromagnetic, and nuclear forces. So with this, I think with everything we've just gone over, we have to give the props to Vedic cosmology. It's not a fluke, and it was very much ahead of its time. So, that is Vedic cosmology for you. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Season 2 of the Ephemeris Podcast. If you're sticking around from Season 1, I do appreciate you doing that, because obviously I needed a little bit of a break, and I hope that wasn't a problem. Maybe there are some episodes you missed out. Make sure to go check those out on Season 1. And yeah, if you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, make sure to follow me on Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. And I would genuinely appreciate a subscribe on YouTube if you're listening on YouTube, which is where I get a huge chunk of my viewers. So I appreciate the support. Thank you very much for listening once again, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.